Hearty welcome to one and all. This is episode 161 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Saturday afternoon with me here in New York. If you check out episode 161 on the YouTube channel, enjoy it, but haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, turn on those notifications. So today marks 47 years since the release of what's generally regarded as one of the greatest film comedies to ever come out of Hollywood. That would be Woody Allen's seminal 1977 classic, Annie Hall. A film which probably has one of the highest percentages of Oscar nominations to wins, which is sort of a bizarre standard, but it was nominated for 5 and won 4. Which is pretty impressive. Normally the ones that run away with Oscars have like 10 or 11 nominations, and we've seen movies get 11, 12, 13 nominations and win maybe 1 or 2, movies like Bugsy. But Annie Hall ended up winning Oscar for Woody Allen's direction, screenplay. It won for Best Picture, and it also won for a magnificent Diane Keaton performance in the title role. And it was sort of the first of that kind of kooky, flighty, but brilliant character. And Diane Keaton has made a career out of playing characters who appear to be ditzy, but are crazy like a fox, as they say. That there's much more going on than their somewhat goofy, la-di-da, as she would say, exterior. Now, Annie Hall is a movie that I like it a lot. It's not my favorite Woody Allen film. I think I would probably have it third, even though historically it's very important. And, Woody, for a guy who doesn't look as if he would be really creative or inventive in terms of his filmmaking techniques, whereas someone like Quentin Tarantino, he looks like not just a genius writer and somebody who's a fucking wizard behind the camera. Tarantino looks like a guy who's going to take risks and chances and do things where you say, holy shit, what is he doing here? But Woody Allen, in his early comic work, films like Take the Money and Run and Bananas and Love and Death, he showed a willingness, everything you always wanted to know about sex but were afraid to ask. He showed a willingness to do things that no one had done before. There are elements in contemporary comedy, even in contemporary sitcoms, that Woody was doing in movies more than 50 years ago, where the average fan, you think that they're just coming up with it now, not realizing that, Annie Hall's my favorite movie, or that scene with Howard Cosell in Bananas is one of the funniest scenes in history. So he was constantly pushing the envelope and taking chances. And he didn't always pay off in his early films, where he would have like dream sequences and is this real? What's happening here? But in Annie Hall, people really responded to the risks that he took and sort of the comedic flights of fancy and leaps of logic that he was able to do and pull off. And he himself is not necessarily, I don't want to say that he is not a good actor. He is, but he's effective within a narrow range. And what he did, to his credit, in this movie, he had different titles. He was going to call it Annie and Alvy. He had a weird title called anhedonia, which is actually a word that it's an inability to accept pleasure. In other words, somebody that's just going to be miserable no matter how good their life appears to be to them. They're just going to be miserable anyway. But at some point in the editing process, because the story goes that Woody and Diane shot a ton of footage, like a crazy amount of footage, at least 10 hours. And Woody was trying to find the movie in the editing room. He had so much material that must have been great that he ended up getting rid of. And he realized the segments, because there was like a murder mystery plot, which he later kind of transmogrified into Manhattan Murder Mystery more than 15 years later. But Woody realized the segments with his character and Diane's character because there was more with Tony Roberts, it was more with maybe Paul Simon, and Jeff Goldblum talking about his mantra. There was other stuff that he thought the movie was going to focus on, and he just kind of kept it more or less to this sort of neurotic comedy about two people who seem to be a good match, but she outgrows him, even though he's successful. And there are so many things in this film that play now when you actually sort of assess the plot. Woody's character, although he comes across like a neurotic and a sad sack, he's not. Alvy Singer is very successful within the world of the film. He has done a lot of work on TV. He's been a comedy writer. This is not just some random guy living in the city. He is a successful, almost up to the level of your basic celebrity. He gets recognized on the street in a famous scene. And Annie Hall she wants to be a singer. And she seems to be going nowhere, but she wants to be a singer, and she wants to grow and change with life, whereas Alvy Singer is just going to bitch and moan nonstop. And this was another thing that Woody did. He wasn't afraid to make his characters look bad. I'm sure he had a big ego as far as knowing that he was a terrific writer and he knew exactly what he wanted to do creatively with the films. But he wasn't afraid to drag the characters he was playing. And the truth is that Annie Hall is a much more likable person than Alvy Singer. She gives more to the relationship than he does. And not because he's a bad person, but because he's okay being the same person. And just because you're successful doesn't mean you don't have the capacity to continue to evolve. And he doesn't seem to get that. He just doesn't seem to get it. And she does. So the basic plot and the basic setup of the story is your typical romantic comedy, just with neurotic New York people. In Woody's case, Jewish, and is a black sheep of his family kind of stuff. And Diane almost plays up the quirkiness and the eccentric nature of her character in the early scenes, and then she seems to settle down. And it's not even so much the stylistic or the actorly choice as that her character really likes him from the start. He just thinks she's hot. And Woody, breaking rules, doing stuff that was not done by other filmmakers to any large extent, their first meeting, we see what they're thinking. And you see that she feels a connection to him, and she's like, he's really too smart for me. I've got to try to keep up here. And Woody, as Alvy Singer, is just like, I wonder what she looks like naked. God, she's hot. And words to that effect. There is the sense of whimsy and invention throughout, even though the film tells what is ultimately a little bit of a sad story of a love gone wrong that didn't have to. If one of the two just tried to keep up with the other rather than complain, or rather than think, can't do this, can't do that. And if that doesn't speak to the realities of people who have been in relationships where when you look back, you say, I did not meet them in the middle. I was too stuck in one place emotionally, psychologically. I had my creature comforts. I don't want to stray from my comfort zone, all of these things. This is not an angle that made any impression on me when I saw this film repeatedly, especially the first half hour, which is screamingly funny. But none of that landed for me because I didn't have any experience with it. You can see relationships develop and sometimes fall apart on screen. But until you yourself, in my opinion, have experienced the highs and lows, the good, the bad, and the ugly, it's not going to land. And watching the movie from a more contemporary perspective, I don't mean 2024, I just mean as an older person who has loved and lost and experienced similar kinds of, bro, you've got to give a little more effort here. Don't just say, oh, well, we hardly ever have sex. What does that have to do with anything? Who cares? Wait, are you kidding? But that's the way Alvy Singer calculates. In Diane's mind, her character, she wants to feel a connection. And it's not just enough that because, well, we're naked in bed, we should have sex. No, she needs more than that. He should need more than that, but he kind of doesn't. As she starts smoking weed just as they're about to do it in one famous scene. And he says, what are you doing? She says, well, it helps relax me. And he says, I'll tell you what, I'll give you some sodium pentothal. You can sleep through the whole thing. Great laugh line. Bro, you don't need to insult her. Another thing that I didn't get, because I was so focused on the setup punchline, the ping pong, rat-tat-tat, the back and forth, the unbelievable natural rhythm between the actor Woody Allen and actress Diane Keaton, which you see in later films, but especially Manhattan Murder Mystery, which I recently talked about on the channel. There are some people that just make magic when they are on screen. And history will tell you Woody and Diane are just two of those people, regardless of what was going on in their personal lives, because they had dated in the early 70s, and I don't know if they had a terrible breakup. Nowadays, I'm sure we would know. He ran off with so-and-so. She ran off with so-and-so. But in the world of the movie, none of that prior identification comes into play. She's committed to the character of Annie Hall. She doesn't break character. This is a quirky, eccentric, really nice person with a lot of talents that maybe she hasn't quite tapped into to the extent that she could, and now she's going to. And he just wants her to be with him, and that should be enough. Static. But there are so many memorable scenes. And it is true that for a contemporary audience, regardless of whether you're my age and aren't familiar with the film, or even someone very young, late teens, early 20s, there are a lot of elements which won't land simply because they are topical references to the Kennedy assassination, the Warren Commission, and communists and fascists in New York City, and cultural appropriation, and stereotypical this and stereotypical that. There's a lot of stuff. Famous people that I hadn't even heard of, just wander into the movie. And there's this bit, which at the time was screamingly funny, where what amounted to a media critic, he may have been the guy to coin the term media, Marshall McLuhan, does about a 20-second walk-on in the movie that if you know who he is, it's hysterical. But the average person under 40 watching this movie, when Marshall McLuhan shows up, number one, you don't know what he looks like. Number two, you don't know who he is. At least when Truman Capote shows up, you have, okay, that's the guy who wrote In Cold Blood. Philip Seymour Hoffman played him in a movie. Oh my God, I love that movie. There is so much creativity on display that even as the plot kind of arcs and twists along, and honestly, the movie loses me in the second half. I don't unabashedly love it. As I said, if you're asking me my top 3 Woody Allen films, I have to put this film in the top 3 just for the historical importance. But I think that Hannah and Her Sisters, if you're asking me the quote-unquote best movie Woody ever made, I think that's his masterpiece. Because he takes the ensemble film, a multi-angled narrative with a lot of different people, and somehow manages to keep everything perfectly balanced. And again, he resists the urge to make his own character simply a clown and figure of fun because he's a hypochondriac. And Woody in this movie is probably a hypochondriac, but it's not beaten into you the way it is in Hannah and Her Sisters. What would happen if a hypochondriac actually thought he was dying and doctors agreed, you might be in trouble here, my friend. I'm sorry. This could be it for you. Now what? Annie Hall has so many memorable scenes, pretty much one after another. And it was not a big budget. Woody always worked on the cheap. Even at this point in time, he was very well established. He's probably around 40. I think he was 40 when the film was shot. So even despite his age, he was someone who had been successful for a really long time. He was a writer. I believe he wrote for the Sid Caesar show. He was a comedy writer who was very highly respected. That's how he got into the movie business. I believe he helped write the screenplay for the Casino Royale, the one with David Niven. I never actually saw that film, just a few minutes. But I know that David Niven played James Bond in the sort of comedic version of Casino Royale. And Woody plays, is it his nephew? Woody actually plays a character named Jimmy Bond. I'm glad that the Daniel Craig Casino Royale did not have a character called Jimmy Bond. Annie Hall ended up making between 9 and 10 times its production cost. And it was dollar for dollar, certainly the highest grossing comedy of its year. But it was one of the top 15 hits of the year, period. Which for that sort of very specific, neurotic, nebbish New York comedy, it shows how many people, and this was not a movie that just the critics loved and audiences, what are you fucking kidding me? Everybody enjoyed it. And Diane Keaton became a fashion trailblazer with the unconventional clothing choices, what she wore. And to this day, Diane Keaton is known as a fashion trailblazer, and she's still famous for whether it's a turtleneck, whether it's for the unusual hats she might wear, or the sunglasses. She was a trendsetter. And I don't know that she necessarily was going for that, or whether Woody said, oh, we could really do something here. You know, you'll become a style icon. Because there's levels of style icon. There's Audrey Hepburn in the movie Charade. I'm not even going to say like Breakfast at Tiffany's, but in the movie Charade, it's like her character is doing nothing more. Well, she's modeling one Givenchy after another. One after another. The whole film, her character is immaculately dialed in from a fashion perspective. It's calling attention to itself. Holy shit, look at how perfect Audrey is in this scene. It must have taken her a couple of days to get ready. That's why we haven't seen her. No, who knows? But it was the fact that Diane, as Annie Hall, it was Annie Hall's quirky personality that her pieces look haphazard. It doesn't look like she's even trying. And I think that viewers of the 70s responded to that. And they enjoyed the humor and they enjoyed the love story between these two people, which despite all of Alvy Singer, all of his wisecracks and all of the laughs, it's not an altogether happy film. See, and it's interesting when you start assessing filmmakers who talk about their work, such as Tarantino, such as Spielberg, and such as Scorsese, but the guys that can really break down what they're doing. Woody has discussed that he felt, and I don't know if he still feels this way, you know, opinions change. And I read a series of interviews that were conducted with Woody Allen while he was filming Manhattan Murder Mystery. So this is now 31 years ago. And at that point in time, Woody was convinced that he had blown the ending of Hannah and Her Sisters. He said, I made it too upbeat. I think I messed up there. But he's always ruthless when it came to his own work. This is the thing. Every creator, whether or not it's that exalted level, every creator has pride in their work. But Woody is one of those guys that has always come across as his own worst critic. And so you don't get that from Tarantino. He gets very defensive when people ask questions he doesn't like. We've seen interviews with him. He's a great interview as long as you don't act like an asshole. You have to sometimes be careful with the way you phrase questions. Because I remember reading an interview with somebody in the business. It wasn't Roger Ebert. It could have been Gene Siskel. It was somebody he respected. And they were asking questions about the movie Jackie Brown, which if it were a different interviewer asking the questions differently, Tarantino would have got pissed off because this interviewer was implying very heavily the script is overwritten and it could have been 20 minutes shorter. You have all of these pointless dialogue scenes. But they were very artful and Tarantino answered the questions as to why he made these choices. And the interviewer asked the questions in such a way it gave Quentin a chance to explain himself. So in the case of Woody, in this particular interview, now think of all the accolades, all of the Oscar wins and nominations that he had, the classic films he made up through Husbands and Wives, which many people would put in his top 10. There are those that think it's a masterpiece. Doesn't really work for me. But Woody, the only film in his career at that point that he says, I think I got this one right. I think I made exactly the movie I was trying to, The Purple Rose of Cairo. That was the only one that he, as filmmaker, sometime as actor, but not in that movie, but as filmmaker, as creator, as part of the Hollywood machinery, I think I got that one right. I think I got it right. So him saying, for example, the ending of Hannah and Her Sisters is too upbeat, I completely disagree with that. Now, Annie Hall doesn't necessarily merit, and it's not the kind of movie that's building towards a hero and girl kiss, fade out type of an ending. But I believe Hannah and Her Sisters is perfect. It does everything right. And the filmmaker himself, I don't know, I think I fucked that up. I mean, could you imagine right now Quentin Tarantino coming out saying, I think I screwed up the ending of Reservoir Dogs. They all should have lived. No. It's almost as if, in some ways, he's afraid to just let it be, let it go. Bro, you made a great movie. So Annie Hall ended up getting these unbelievable levels of acclaim, completely unexpected for a film comedy. And I believe it was the first comedy. It holds a record, shortest film ever to win Best Picture. I believe the running time, 93 minutes. That's it. And it goes by really fast. See, as much as I can sit here, on my perch and tell you that the film isn't as good in the second half as it is in the first half, even though there's still great scenes, I can sit there and say that, but the movie goes by really fast. It is a fast, fun film. And despite the topical humor and references that are not going to make sense for people, the bits of comic invention, the ingenious ways that Woody flips back and forth through time within scenes. He's doing things that even now you will say, holy shit, I didn't know that they did this back then. I thought that Seth MacFarlane on Family Guy, I didn't know that he was aping Annie Hall. I didn't know that he was using tricks that this guy had used. And it's always fun when you discover that something you think is new is just a new spin on something that's already been done. It's actually one of the things about Seth MacFarlane that someone like me appreciates, that he's a Gen Xer and he saw all the same movies that us Gen Xers have, and he gets to put that into his work, and not everybody's going to get the joke. But if his creativity is on point, it doesn't matter. Because when Peter Griffin is living out a scene from North by Northwest, it's funny whether or not we realize, oh, he's supposed to be Roger Thornhill, I get it. Oh, he's Andy Dufresne from Shawshank, I get it. It's still funny even if we don't get it. And some of the weird cuts where Woody is talking as Annie Hall about when he was a kid, hey, why would I get criticized for a little kid? I'm 6 years old and I'm expressing a normal curiosity. 8-year-old boys don't have little girls on their minds. I did. For God's sake, Alvy, even Freud speaks of a latency period. It means that's little kids reciting this back and forth. But I didn't have a latency period. I can't help it. There's so much in this movie to recommend. All the performances, even the bit parts. And Paul Simon, of course, the famous musician, he has a small role. He's a scream. Jeff Goldblum, it's just so shocking to see him looking like a kid. Sigourney Weaver, if you look quickly, holy shit, that's Sigourney Weaver. Everyone in the movie hits a home run. And as I say, that there are people in the cast who originally thought their roles were going to be bigger. We talked about this the other day when it was Adrian Brody's birthday, that he was the star of Terrence Malick's The Thin Red Line, until Malick in the editing room realized to him the sequences with Adrian didn't work as well as a lot of the other stuff, and particularly with Jim Caviezel's character and Sean Penn's character. And he even increased and enhanced Nick Nolte's character more than what he thought. And Elias Koteas, sometimes you find it in the editing room. And nobody has said anything that, to my knowledge, about, oh my God, I thought that I was going to be like the third star in Annie Hall and I'm not even in the movie or I'm barely in it. But it's the way it goes. When you are at crazy levels of creativity, as Woody Allen was at that particular phase, you can shoot and think you're making one movie and then end up making something entirely different. And clearly, all that editing he did, whittling down at least 10 hours of good footage into 93 minutes, including credits, man, what a home run hitter. I mean, he had to have been at a level to be able to know instinctively, this doesn't work, this works. This doesn't work, this doesn't work, this doesn't. No, we got to get rid of it. No. We don't need a murder mystery angle. And then there was like a whole thing that he thought was going to be a scream where it's a way that Annie orders a sandwich, like a corned beef with mayo, some kind of horrendous combination. But that was part of a running gag that paid off in this murder mystery subplot. There was so much in this that he whittled down into this still phenomenally inventive 93-minute movie. And when it won Oscars no one was surprised. This was not like a series of real upset victories. When you had big movies like Spielberg's Close Encounters, but I mean, Close Encounters is okay, but Spielberg went back in the editing room and he made the film better when he had what was called a special edition, kind of an early phase director's cut scenario. The original Close Encounters has long stretches where it's not really that interesting, and critics still loved it. But Roger Ebert, for example, preferred when Spielberg went back in, and he always asked the question, you wonder why Steven didn't do this in the first place. He wasn't under any pressure. Sometimes you just don't hit it. In the case of Annie Hall, Woody Allen knocked it out of the park, and most people disagree with me. I have never talked to anyone that I know of that says, yeah, the movie's not really that great in the second half. It's incredible for the first 40, 45 minutes, and then it's just okay. And most people are with it as the story rips through one twist in the characters' lives, one change of location, horror of horrors, Woody goes to California. Oh, and there is one iconic moment in the film. And I mentioned in Manhattan Murder Mystery that Woody went with an idea during a scene, went off the script, and Diane Keaton broke the fourth wall and clearly looked at Carlo De Palma, who was the cinematographer, although she seemed to still be in character, but she looks into the camera. In this movie, there's a scene where Woody, as Alvy Singer, is supposed to, I know it sounds stupid, he's supposed to be doing a line of cocaine. He was supposed to do it, they had flowers, some bullshit like that. But Woody fucked up the take. The camera's rolling, the shot's perfect, you got Diane here, Woody here, and he goes to snort the coke and he sneezes. And if you look at Diane Keaton's reaction, she is out of character. She has a look on her face like he fucked up the take. And for all we know, maybe this was the 10th time. She has a look of pure exasperation. But it was such a perfect idea of how Woody Allen really feels about California, or at least how he felt about California 47 years ago. He kept it in the film. He kept it in the film because nobody is going to say to themselves, hey, Diane's reaction looks a little bit off. I don't think she's in character. No, it's so quick you wouldn't know unless someone told you. But even that, he's willing to take risks. He's keeping takes that were blown takes in the movie. A master at the top of his craft. And I would say I've probably seen the film 10 times from start to finish. But I do like to often just watch the early segments, the humor, Woody as a boy, and he got an actor who looked so much like him when he had the glasses on. It was looking great. Even though Woody said that kid wasn't necessarily the easiest to work with, he's hilarious. Now, Annie Hall is available. It's actually streaming on Amazon Prime and Tubi, and if you get MGM Plus. So some combination of that, you will be able to find it on streaming for those of you who maybe haven't seen it and heard about it and are interested in checking it out. If you have any of those platforms, you don't have to pay for it. It is a legitimately great film, and those Oscars were well-deserved, despite my own personal reservations of the movie. It is worth seeing. You won't be disappointed. And you will probably be surprised how much you laugh out loud during that 93-minute running time. Annie Hall, directed by Woody Allen, starring Woody Allen, and a magnificent Oscar-winning performance from the great Diane Keaton. This has been episode 161 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Saturday afternoon into early evening with me here in New York. But if you caught this episode on the YouTube channel, enjoyed it, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with episode 162 real soon. Until then, Peace.